Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Allow me to introduce introduce Haafizah to you. I met Haafizah on the Atheist Muslims group. We basically connected over this whole case of Khadija that I've been posting for you guys to be aware of. So, yeah, welcome to to our quick meet and greet, Haafizah. Very interested to hear about what you guys are doing, and maybe if you could just give us a bit of background about the organization that you are a part of, and what your interests are and what you guys are trying to achieve.
All right. Hi, Dean. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'd be happy to chat about AMSA and maybe some things about Khadija. So I'm from AMSA, which is Atheist Muslims South Africa. And we used to be ex-MZA, ex-Muslims of South Africa, but we changed, we rebranded it. It wasn't last year, the year before. And the aims of our organization are quite clear. We're a secular organization striving towards secular values in Africa, particularly within the community, which is the sort of Muslim community. We do have two main aims, which is to, one, create safe spaces for ex-Muslims to collaborate, to speak, to engage, to come together as a community and to find support. And the second is to create dialogue between ourselves and the Muslim community, particularly Muslim authorities in the community, to sort of normalize what it means to be an atheist Muslim and what it means to be an ex-Muslim in the community.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just my personal exposure to Islam, but I find that it's quite pernicious in its attack on apostates. So maybe maybe you can share some of your experience. What's it like being an apostate in a Muslim community? Are people very suspicious, or what is the general feedback that you get from people around you in your community when they hear that you're an apostate?
Yeah. So yeah, just to speak to that comment that you made, I think most religions are defined by who they exclude, and Islam's no different in that it's defined by the fact that certain people are not included in the in crowd, and therefore sort of stand on the perimeters of the community and are therefore easier targets for persecution. Islam is unique in that it's quite a political and quite a militant religion in many ways, if you look at the history of Islam. So that has definitely fed into lots of types of persecution, and we see it internationally in terms of the fact that there are 13 countries where blasphemy is a crime, and all 13 of them, sorry, not a crime, are lead to the death penalty, and all 13 are predominantly Muslim countries. So it's definitely a big issue in the community. For ex-Muslims in South Africa, we are protected by a secular constitution, by the fact that Islam is a minority religion. It doesn't have a lot of influence. But we do find that in many ways, the Muslim community is sort of like a bubble that can find ways to disassociate from the grander sort of South African identity. And in those little pockets, those little bubbles, we do find that some persecution and some repression happens. So we haven't had any major cases of people being physically harmed or violently harmed. There was one case that we came across of someone who had been physically assaulted by their family members. They've since made up with their family members, and they're now, on good terms with them. But there was sort of an initial physical violence. However, of the most of our members and most of the people in the ex-Muslim and atheist Muslim communities face persecution based on sort of the persecution of their thoughts, their ideas, their identity, stereotyping, stigmatization, and so on, manipulation from family members and friends and community members. So it's really on that level that normalizing what it means to be an atheist in that community so that people can understand and sympathize. There's less prejudice and so on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I find it interesting that you talk about, how people are basically ostracized on a social level with that whole in and out group mentality, because that is, it's one of the hallmarks of the control mechanism that religion uses, especially to keep people in check and keep people in line, because there are social consequences to apostasy. That is one of the biggest motivating factors that keep people within a religion, because they feel that the cost of leaving the religion outweighs the benefit of the emancipation therefrom. So it's quite a universal theme. I just find, like I said, I find the way that Islam especially seeks to be this totalitarian solution to people's lives. It controls thought, behavior. There are codes for marriage, for divorce, for inheritance distribution. You name it, there is some sunnah, some hadith or something that applies to it. I find it very great. But that's funny. It's very interesting. I want to ask you whether, like I always ask people who've had exposure to Islam this question. The Christians have had a reformation, and every major religious identity have had some form of reformation where they realize, hey, the Dark Ages, we need to move on from that, because people are looking at us very strangely, when we try to enforce those archaic ideas. And I believe that Islam is yet to experience that kind of a major, revival, or how can we say, like dragging it, kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And I think that is, I remember hearing, it was a while ago, I think it was a talk that Ayaan Hirsi Ali gave, where she was also advocating for this idea of, having Islam go through a reformation. But the critics of that position have this concept that the scriptures are so pure and intact and revealed directly from the lips of Allah to the Prophet, and etc. I'm interested to hear what you think about a Islamic Reformation, whether it's even possible or if I'm just having a pipe dream.
I think it's definitely possible. I do think it's a difficult sort of journey that Islam would have to go on to get there. I think you touch on two very interesting, very important things, I think, that are linked back to that, which is that Islam is quite totalitarian. It controls every aspect of your life. And because of that, it's very hard to reform it. If it's representing every little part of your life, it becomes something that's so deeply ingrained in your sense of self and your identity and daily life and everything that reforming, it's not just then a longer reformation, it's a reformation of your whole life and the way that you live and your culture. And but also there is the sort of thing about the purity of the scriptures. So the Quran is pure and unchanged, and we're always kind of told, you can't, if you take one line out of the Quran, if you take one comma out of place, you're going to change the meaning. So there's kind of this idea that nothing should ever change, everything should stay the same. And I don't know if it was always like that historically. I don't believe that it was. If you look at sort of Sunni movements in parts of Africa and Asia, there were definitely people who began to want to change the way that they practiced Islam. But of course, the biggest detriment to that, as we speak today, is the Wahhabist movement and its implications all around
They
the
are
world.
mostly in Saudi Arabia, right? That
Yeah.
region. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's been so influential. A lot of alims and so on have gone to Saudi and studied and learned this version of Islam, and it's being propagated all over the world. Saudi, we know, is a huge exporter of their version of Islam, and is always happy to be funding madrasas and doing all
Yeah.
sorts of things in order to promote
The
Wahhabism.
Dawa crowd love them.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so it's tough to see a reformation on the horizon. But of course, there are, I think I want to believe that young people are starting to think critically. There's been a huge shift in the way that people are starting to see the world. Um, and you have, LGBT movements and feminist movements and so on, sort of wreaking havoc in the more conservative spaces. So that's always positive.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. It's strange that that you bring up minority groups within a larger cultural context. Especially, I mean, women in Islam are treated as complete second-class citizens, which is something that always fascinates me. It's just how, how like we said earlier, that sense of totalitarian control, it extends to the to women especially, where I mean I've heard, I don't know if it's specifically correct, but there's something like women only inherit a certain percentage of a will, and all these dictates about not being able to be in the presence of men without escorts, and that kind of thing must really affect a person's just sense of self, and when you are controlled to that level, I can't even imagine what it would be like to have that sense of freedom and identity taken away from you. If you can maybe just give us an idea of how how women from a female perspective approach this kind of control. I mean, do they willingly just submit to it as a matter of fact? Is it done begrudgingly, or what is the how can we say, the view of these kinds of restrictions and control in the mind of women within Islam?
Yeah, sure. I mean, even in our sort of ex-Muslim spaces, we try to, differentiate and try to understand sort of how women experience Islam differently to men, and therefore experience apostasy differently to men as well. In the community, you're absolutely right. There's huge amounts of discrimination. In the scripture, of course, it's very sort of clear and honest in its patriarchal endeavors. Um, so I mean, you mentioned the inheritance, which is that women get half the inheritance of men. And this is supposedly because women don't have to feed their families or don't have to care for their families, which is just creates huge economic issues for women who are actually the breadwinners of families. You have sort of clothing and the discrimination in terms of clothing. Women cover much more of their bodies, and this is a kind of objectification, kind of sort of packaging women for consumption. So there's lots of different types of discrimination. A lot of it has to do with the relations between the genders, and a lot of it has to do with sex and power relations. I would say that there are a couple of ways that people tend to react to that. There's obviously women like myself who just go, well, this is, not great. I'm going to leave. I mean, a lot of ex-Muslim spaces are are headed by women. if you look at Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, which is headed by Mariam Namazi, Ex-Muslims of North America, which is headed by Sarah Haider. So I think that women tend to be much louder critics just because it's such a personal thing. Whereas we see a lot of men who leave Islam for like these logical reasons of like science and philosophy. Whereas women, it's usually like a very personal thing. Like I've been personally offended by this religion. However, in the community, of course, the women in the community tend to struggle with it. I've seen quite a bit, but have to ultimately find ways to exist in that space. And so either they sort of just agree with the logic of it and it's sugar coated, to be, you have to dress that way because we care about you so much. You're precious, just like a pearl or whatever. And they use these little bits to make them feel better about it. Abusive relationship to religion. Other women we've seen have sort of approached feminist views, and I have kind of a love-hate relationship with this idea, because on the one hand I'm like, it's really great that people, especially women, are sort of speaking about being feminists in the Muslim community and wanting to maybe preach in the mosque, or wanting to attend sermons which were only kept for men, or saying hijab is my choice, so I can take it off if I want to. But on the other hand, it's also quite detrimental, because what a lot of these movements, these feminist movements inside of the Muslim community tend to do is they tend to shut down any criticism of Islam. So if a woman like me talks about how hijab is discriminatory and a symbol of male dominance over women in a very patriarchal society, that it's a symbol of Islamic political dominance, that most women are actually forced to wear it. Most women, it's not a choice for them. I might get shut down by a Muslim feminist and told, well, no, that's not real Islam. So it can be, there are positives to it. There are,
yeah. If I have to hear from a Muslim apologist one more time that euphemism about the wrapped sweet, I'm going to lose the plot, honestly.
like a protected candy.
Wrapped candy is always best, and I mean, like, honestly, it's such a sickly comparison, to try and right. Well, the reason, like I said initially, why we got connected is this case of Khadija's, because I ran into.
Oh, sorry, I don't know if you can hear sort of weird things happening in the background. I think my neighbor's fixing their car or something. So I'm sorry if that interrupts you.
It's not that noticeable. Don't worry about it.
All right.
like I was saying, is I ran into Khadija on Twitter, and that impassionate plea for help that she made on Twitter really moved me. Like I was really consumed with this urge and need to help. So I was hustling around and trying to make contacts and everything, and it's actually such a relief, just to have heard that at least there is some progress happening with her asylum case. So I don't know if you just want to maybe paint a bit of a background picture, for our viewers about how Khadija ended up in the country, and maybe some of the challenges that she's facing in her journey to finally get asylum.
All right, so I definitely don't want to talk too much to the current situation with Khadija, because it is sort of fast moving, and I'm not her lawyer, so I can't speak too much. Yeah. But yeah, her background. So I met Khadija in 2019, which was when she first came to South Africa. She reached out to one of our members on Twitter, who then put her in contact with myself and the other admins of AMSA. And so she's been in the country since 2019. She had quite a horrible experience living in Saudi Arabia, far more than what the everyday woman would have had living in Saudi Arabia, which is already terrible, because she comes from such an abusive home, and her father and her brothers were so, physically and emotionally violent towards her. Um, Her problem, domestic violence and that sort of thing exists everywhere in the world, but her problem in terms of being a woman living in Saudi Arabia was that there was then no way for her to get any help. There was no way for her to get any assistance in that regard. So she ended up, attempting to file reports with the police, attempting to speak to NGOs. She was told to go to the Yemeni embassy. There's lots of sort of racism and that sort of thing in terms of not being an actual Saudi citizen and being, Yemeni. Sorry about that.
No
And so
problem.
she, so she ended up, at the Yemeni embassy, where she was only discriminated against further. And basically, what had happened was a horrible interaction between the ambassador, the Yemeni ambassador in Saudi Arabia, herself and her father, where the ambassador actually told her father to marry her off. She's a troublemaker. You can't control her, or just marry her off. And part of that control that they wanted to control about her was both her sexuality and her religiosity. So because Khadija is not a practicing Muslim, and she doesn't associate herself with Islam, she's an ex-Muslim, but also because she didn't want to get married, because she's asexual. She didn't want to ascribe to that sort of gender expectation. So they sort of saw her as a troublemaker, and they wanted to marry her off, which was around the time when she decided that she had to flee. She didn't really have any choice, because she wasn't getting any assistance from any of the authorities in Saudi Arabia. And of course, because her life itself would be at risk if she tried to live openly as a liberated ex-Muslim woman. Which was when she fled and came to South Africa in 2019. She then applied for asylum, as one does when they arrive in the country. Her asylum was rejected at first, and then she had to sort of apply once again. I think you can apply once more or something before it's finalized. So she had to apply again, and she then waited 2 years to get a response. So she's been really, really anxious and just living in limbo for 2 years. Sorry, not 2 years. It should be, 2 years, just over 2 years. Just sort of waiting for, waiting for a result. Obviously, as someone who's not a citizen and doesn't have any sort of legal papers to be in the country, it's been difficult for her to get a job, difficult for her to open a bank account, simple things like that. So even when we've tried to sort of help her with money and things, we had to find like roundaway routes, because you couldn't just send an EFT, or so it's been quite like logistically difficult for her to live in South Africa in limbo. And then obviously last week we found out that her application was rejected for a second time, which was the sort of quite explosive, and which is why she's, I think, feeling so vulnerable and insecure speaking about it.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine. And I mean, at least we have some positive development in the case, as I don't know if you are at liberty to just paint a ray of sunshine, at least in the dark clouds. But like I said, I mean, I was right there with her feeling. I mean, like, I was literally looking at the clock, looking for the deadline to elapse, and it was such a stressful period, But like I told you, like I said to a friend of mine, I don't know why I got so emotionally invested in this whole drama, because I asked myself, is it because she is an ex-Muslim? Is it because she is a woman? Is it because of that video that she posted? Is it because of the injustice that I feel within my own country, where people are excluded from such a basic right, which is freedom from persecution? I mean, I just, I'm just hopeful that there will be a positive resolution to this, and I hope that you can put some hope into the situation for us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't want to speak too much to what exactly is going on with her, but I will sort of speak to the positive aspect, some of the positive aspects. So the first is that she's very lucky to have wonderful legal representation with Lawyers for Human Rights. And in the past, she had a private lawyer, and it didn't quite work out. So she's now on sort of a better path with her new legal representation. And I think that we're very lucky to sort of live in a country where an organization like Lawyers for Human Rights can exist, can challenge the government, can challenge state institutions, and help to bring about justice. She hasn't been deported. So we're very lucky because the deadline was Friday. She was told that she had to leave by Friday, but of course, we know that there's all sorts of issues with Home Affairs. I don't know if they understand themselves how these things work, but she hasn't been deported. She is on a path to a better situation. And yeah, she's getting all the help that she needs in terms of legal representation, which I think is the most important thing, really, when coming up against a bigger sort of solution. Yeah.
No, that's such a relief to hear. I'm telling you, it was. I said to a friend of mine as well. I said, I do not know how people who do this kind of work with refugees full time, how they cope with it emotionally. Like it was so stressful. Just working with this one case, I cannot imagine, what kind of trauma people must go through. I mean, like I would need to deprogram myself with a psychologist after every single case. It's very, very much. And the thing is, what I also didn't understand was that, we welcome with open borders. The entire continent is basically living, in some form or, have got some form of residency or permit or something to stay here. And yet here we have a refugee, like a genuine income refugee who is having to deal with all this red tape and bureaucracy. It just didn't sit well with me for some reason.
Yeah. I think it's definitely an ongoing issue. I mean, the different lawyers and so on that I've spoken to about the case have all kind of said, well, I've been waiting 20 years. Some people have been waiting 15 years to get, any kind of residency in South Africa. So it's definitely a bigger sort of systemic issue. And I think, with refugees who come from different African countries, neighboring states and so on, who come into South Africa, there is just a much more sort of, the individuals who are working on the cases, the caseworkers and so on at Home Affairs, at these asylum are much more clued up on the situation in those countries, because we see so many of those refugees and because they come. And also because they're entering at the borders, whereas we're not very used to people flying into the country and then wanting asylum. So, when I had first met Khadija and I spoke with people from Amnesty International about it, and I said, like, what is the situation? And they said, well, the worst thing that could happen is that they'll detain her at the airport because they don't know what to do with people when they arrive at the airport, because we don't see that very often. And then, of course, like ending up at the asylum office itself and having, a person who's sitting in front of you who doesn't understand the situation in Saudi Arabia, can't see what the problem is. We don't have any other refugees coming from Saudi Arabia. What is even your issue? Definitely adds to, it's a kind of ignorance and an unwillingness to learn and to listen. And Khadija, who doesn't speak very well English, she speaks Arabic, had to have a translator. And her translator was an Egyptian woman who was a Muslim woman, who she already felt had some kind of prejudice towards her, was the person intervening between her and the caseworker at the asylum office. So we already, we're not geared up to deal with someone fleeing on the basis of religion. We just have, you know, we don't even have an interpreter for that type of person.
Yeah, I mean, that it puts her at a distinct disadvantage, you know, when, you know, firstly, it's a foreign language. Secondly, the interpreter is biased against you. So, yeah, no, I can see how things, you know, started off on a bad foot. Yeah. But, you know, I'm very relieved. You know, I'm very relieved to know that there are people at least fighting in her camp, and, you know, that things are happening, things are in motion, and that she's not being deported back to, you know, face whatever is waiting for her back in Yemen, because I cannot even begin to think what, you know, what will happen to her when she gets back there. You know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I want to thank you so much for your time, Haafizah. You know, it's really been a pleasure meeting you. And, you know, if ever there's any opportunity for us to collaborate on something, you know, please feel free to reach out. You know, we've got what we call embassies scattered all over the country in the major cities, you know, so if there's anything we can do to help out or be of assistance, you know, please feel free to reach out. And I'm keen to follow you guys and see what great work you do to promote, you know, that ideal of having having, you know, secularism, you know, shine its light on the Muslim community, so to say.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you reached out. We actually didn't know that there was an Atheist Republic in South Africa. So
I mean, collectively, I think we've got it's just under or over 1,000 members in our Facebook
wow.
groups. You know, so I mean, it's growing steadily. You know, I don't think people really know about us, like you say. So, you know, like things like having these conversations and just normalizing atheism, you know, and getting the word out there will, you know, will aid in our efforts just to grow the community. Because ultimately, like you said, you know, like you guys want to create a safe space for people to express themselves freely. That is exactly what we attempt to do as well. You know, just to create community and create a space for like-minded people where they can freely express their ideas. You know, so we are of one mind in that goal.
Yeah. It's fantastic to know.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing the story. You know, so we all know what's happening with Khadija's. And if you have any updates, you know, please feel free to reach out, and, you know, we can update our members as well.
I also just want to say to you and to your members, thank you so much for covering Khadija's story. And the most important thing at this point that we can do as sort of civil society is just make a noise. And the more we have these sort of conversations, the more we create awareness, not just for Khadija, but for, you know, the refugee situation as a whole, and ex-Muslims and atheist communities. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. Have a good afternoon.
You too.